Education Neighborhood Committee, October 27th, Councilmember Zine. Where's Councilmember Hunt?
Not attending.
Not attending. Is that,
You can proceed with communications from the chair.
no, I understand
Yeah.
that. She hasn't been there the last couple. Does this date conflict with her or something?
I'll check with our staff.
This date and time, maybe we need to adjust the date and time.
Do I get sergeants?
No, I just, think that she may have another, because I have the plum committee that was right before this, and we just ended, and she may have a conflicting committee. That's what I'm thinking, that maybe,
Do you know?
But her deputy sent an email informing us that she won't make it to this meeting.
at all?
Yeah, that's the only reason. That, there's no.
So she said she'll never make it to this neighborhood. Well, then we need to replace her or something. Well, I mean, we just can't have members of a committee. This is only a two-member committee, and you only have a correspondence from the chair. There's no quorum. So we need to figure out if she can't, what the conflict is, and then ask the president to assign someone else to this. So we'll have two members of a committee. What do you think?
I think you're correct.
Yeah, I didn't know that she,
I didn't know that either. We need to check and see
we need to find out.
if there's a scheduling conflict.
If there is a scheduling conflict, we can make this at 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever it's gonna be.
So are you asking Eric to do that, or?
I can.
Chris will do that.
Okay,
All right, we have two items on the agenda.
okay.
We have a packed audience here, so thank you for attending.
Item number,
Are you ready to begin?
I'm ready. Item number 1 is the Chief Legislative Analyst Report relative to the status of the Neighborhood Council Review Commission recommendations. As you're aware, the charter required for the City Council to establish a commission to evaluate the citywide system of neighborhood councils. At your last meeting of August 11, 2009, the CLA City Clerk, Dunn Department, City Attorney, and representatives of the Neighborhood Council Review Commission, as well as BONT, discussed the status of major NCRC recommendations, which included the 2009 and future 2010 Neighborhood Council Board member elections by the city clerk, the development of a peer grievance process, submission of a council files by neighborhood councils, development of uniform and consistent bylaws for neighborhood councils, and a new sunshine law for the operation of neighborhood councils. At this time, no action was taken. At this time, no action was taken on this matter. And at this time, the CLA report is before you to be noted and filed.
So what do we do about those matters?
What do we do about these matters?
Well, the ones that have not been, no action been taken.
At this point,
1, 2, 3, 5 items.
what you can do is hold this report in committee and request that those departments come forward and report on where they are with those recommendations.
Now we're gonna hear from the general manager.
Bungling Kim, Neighborhood Empowerment.
Nice shirt, stripes so good.
Thank you. How about the tie? Just wanted to give you an update that the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners is pursuing several of the recommendations that were, the actions that were adopted by council. A few of them include clarification of the commission's role. A peer grievance system is currently in process of being finalized, and we're probably about 3 or 4 months away from developing that. And the city clerk, in terms of organizing elections, that's already been adopted, as you know. And the city clerk is preparing to hold elections next year. And
What about the council file?
the council file was adopted. However, the council attached a modified form of the Form 700, which many neighborhood councils feel requires neighborhood councils to disclose more financial information, and that it discourages them from filing neighborhood council files.
How many
So
are under investigation for stealing city funds?
all the neighborhood councils under investigation have been processed with PD. Right now, there are 2 remaining, and the rest have been prosecuted by the DA.
So there has been a tendency by some neighborhood councils to abscond with neighborhood council funds, which are taxpayers' funds.
Yes, a few have.
So you would think that with that, to err on the side of caution, there'd be some type of report necessary to make sure that funds did not evaporate in the future, as we've seen. And I want to commend you on launching that with the investigation, which has revealed some serious allegations of theft of city funds,
Correct.
and not just a few dollars, but thousands of dollars.
Right.
So I think if we're going to do that, there needs to be some standard where we can make sure and verify those folks that are involved in the board and the treasurer and the president, et cetera, that there's some type of a verification, some type of process so we can prevent this from happening again. If we don't prevent it from happening again, then we are negligent in our responsibilities to watch the taxpayers' dollars.
Right.
And since there's been convictions, there's been indictments, et cetera, it's a great concern. It's not just one or two. There were a few of them throughout the city. And while we have, what, 90 neighborhood councils now,
Yes.
5 of them, or 6 of them, or 7 of them is way too many. One's too many when you talk about funds. If it's a police officer, then they come down to the whole police department. Neighborhood councils feeding off those dollars from the taxpayers like everyone else.
I'll be finalizing some policies to prevent future abuses of public funds. One of them will include requiring all boards to review their financials on a regular basis, because we feel that the more eyes that are on the numbers, the less likelihood there is going to be for criminal acts. We're also exploring fingerprinting of treasurers
And bonding.
and bonding. So those are the major policies that will probably be implemented within the next month or two.
And we have some neighborhood councils that have not complied with the audit and the information that we've requested.
Correct.
I sent letters to 2 of the presidents, and have you gotten copies of those letters?
I haven't.
And Chris, make sure that we get those copies, and I'll be happy to send to the remaining that haven't complied, to let them know that their money is not going to be dispersed, and they're not permitted to spend any more money.
Right.
I think all these are good ideas, and it's a process that continues to evolve. But when we start having, shall be very blunt, people stealing money, we've got to do something to correct it real quick.
Right.
So those are the issues. What about of the 73 recommendations, 33 have been implemented, 14 process being implemented, 5 pending in education committee, 5 pending in this committee. Those are the 5. Okay, so we actually, for the 73 total, everything is accounted for in one sense or another.
Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry.
So we should note and file this?
Yes. I'm
Everybody-
sorry, you're talking.
That's okay. Note and file?
Yes.
Since we're on the track for success with it? Okay, so recommendation, we note and file number 1. And let's go to number 2.
Item number 2 is a motion from Smith Zine relative to the feasibility of neighborhood councils in the 12th district continue to store emergency materials for the community.
John Brary, CD 12. You sure that's you, John?
Councilman and the entire committee, good afternoon. John
Entire
Boyer,
committee, today I am the entire committee.
I understand. I'm John Boyer on behalf of Councilman Greg Smith, and I'm here because the councilman is very supportive of neighborhood councils and their role in providing services to their neighborhood, one of which being emergency preparedness training, and most of our neighborhood councils have offered at least one training in the CERT, the Community Emergency Response Team training, and many have developed outreach efforts and events to engage more of their community in preparedness through activities such as the Great California Shakeout. And one of our neighborhood councils has begun to store supplies to respond in terms of a disaster, and others are looking to that as an example of their role. And the councilman would like to see, as much as possible, neighborhood councils given the ability to play this role in their community of emergency preparedness and storing these supplies and using them in the case of a disaster.
And where do they receive these supplies from?
They purchase them using the city allocated funds.
what type of supplies are we talking about? Emergency materials for the community?
Correct.
What type of materials?
Things from cribbing materials to
What kind of materials?
cribbing. It's the way that you do. Somebody help me here. Emergency supplies.
You said it. Which-
I did. That's what they keep saying in the meetings. Cribbing material. Non-perishable supplies that would be used, not food, not water, but supplies that would help with
Medical?
minor
Some
medical,
cases.
aspirin, backboards, and things of that nature. But also supplies to support CERT trained members in their activities in the community, such as bolt cutters and things that they would use for search and rescue, and other supplies to protect and assist their neighborhood in the area.
And they would store these materials where?
They've currently, the neighborhood council in question has purchased a storage
Shed?
not a shed, what do you
Container.
cargo container, and they have made an agreement with the LAUSD and the Department of Rec and Parks to store on site in those public owned properties with direct access, and they're locked and secured with keys being given to a number of the neighborhood council members and the facility on which they are stored.
Any perishables in there?
I think the shelf life of this stuff is 5 years, but nothing is consumable in terms of ingesting. No food, no water.
No water?
It's not.
So just to rescue people?
It's this applies to rescue and support neighborhood safeguarding in the case of an emergency.
No perishables?
And Councilman, if I may, I issued a memo to neighborhood councils April of 2009 because it had come to my attention that neighborhood councils had been quite active. Some neighborhood councils had become quite active, but that there needed to be some greater consistency across what neighborhood councils were trying to do. And so what it was brought to my attention is that neighborhood councils have been organizing emergency preparedness most often on their own. And I've been reaching out to both fire and to emergency management to see if we could get them to incorporate the efforts of neighborhood councils into their disaster response plans. And I think it would be a great opportunity for the city to utilize the volunteer manpower of neighborhood councils, but there are some legal issues with neighborhood councils themselves under the entity of a neighborhood council providing direct services, and you may want to ask the city attorney's opinion on that. We need some clarification from the city in terms of policies because currently, as I'm being told, the ordinances and the charter authorize neighborhood councils to be advisory.
Right.
And having them involved in direct kind of service provision becomes problematic from a policy perspective.
So I know that in Tarzana, which I represent, they came to me and they wanted an allocation, and I said, I'm not providing the dollars, get it from the neighborhood council, you got funds for these. I think if Tarzana's doing it, they're doing it up in the 12th district, some kind of a coordinated effort, because say one district has bolt cutters and one district has hammers,
Right.
These folks have good intention, but they're not in the rescue business. Most of them are good, honorable citizens. So I think using emergency management, in particular, what's his name,
Featherstone.
Featherstone.
Featherstone, the general manager, to have his department work with your department, and those neighborhood councils that wish to do this, we could have a coordinated fashion versus what we'll end up with now is sheds everywhere and a whole hodgepodge of things. Some people want horse blankets and some people want,
Right.
Wheelbarrows. I can just imagine what they're gonna do when they get the money and they go out to Home Depot or Lowe's or OHS and say, okay, now, what do we think let's get flashlights, okay,
That's
well,
right.
let's get this, let's get that. And you'll have a whole hodgepodge and nothing will really be coordinated as we need. So why don't we do with this is to have, just like law enforcement, LAPD carries certain weapons, they're authorized, you can't carry anything else. Your handcuff keys are interchangeable, whatever kind of handcuff, you gotta have some kind of coordination, because if an incident happens in the 12th district, and people from the 3rd district go up to help people in the 12th district, and they've got tools that aren't compatible, we could end up with a real merry-go-round. So I think what we need to do is coordinate it, it's a good intention. So why don't we bring this back with the emergency management folks, and let Featherstone and his folks figure out how it's gonna be coordinated with the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. It's a great idea, because we got the CERT people who've been trained with the green vests. I don't know if they have any equipment other than the hard hat and the green vest. And they have good intentions, but the type of equipment, gloves and this, I mean, you could imagine what
Right.
people would be, but, you know, it's like, well, let's go out and buy stuff. What are we gonna buy? And then Tarzana also wants to coordinate with Tarzana Hospital on the medical thing, where they have basically an urgent care if they have a disaster. So then people would, instead of going to the Tarzana Hospital, they'd go to the Tarzana Community Center, where they'd have equipment. But are you a nurse? Are you a paramedic? Are you an EMT? You know, are you gonna put the defibrillator on someone? It's just, it opens up something could be wonderful. It's gotta be controlled and regulated, so it doesn't end up getting carried away.
Correct.
So why don't we bring this back to this committee with the folks? And if we want to bring the fire department, I think if we bring emergency management, it's really up their alley. And he's a former fire captain who knows the ins and outs. Because we got the USAR team and all the equipment they get from the federal government. And I think if we're gonna do it, maybe through the neighborhood council, an allocation, those that wanna participate, we could do something with the neighborhood council funds to say this is what we would provide. And if we buy it in bulk and we figure out what they need, and those that have the facility to hold it, to maintain it, to store it, we could do it that way. So it's coordinated. So, you know, Tarzana has this, Northridge has, it's all the same.
Right.
Otherwise, we're gonna end up with anything under the sun and everything under the sun, and nothing's gonna match. Yes.
Yeah, Peter King, City Attorney's Office. But you basically pointed out all the issues that the City Attorney's Office has with this. Additionally, as advisory bodies, in order for them to go in the business of being search and rescue, operational issues such as what supplies go in what bins and where, we would really have to change the charter to put them, neighborhood councils, in that role. So we have recommended that, you know, they have communication trees, they host forums in what to do when there's an emergency. They're more than welcome to allocate their supplies to it, but we've recommended all along that they interface with our emergency services department.
I think another idea with that, those that would be eligible for this equipment, this acquisition, would have to be CERT trained. And that way, they've been trained by the fire department.
Right.
They know what they're doing. They have that basic knowledge. And if that way we brought in, you want to do it in your neighborhood council, that's great. But now we need to get volunteers that are CERT trained. Otherwise, it could turn into a mess.
Right. As an entity, we don't want basically the neighborhood councils stepping into the role of being operationally emergency services personnel. However, they should be encouraging their members to get CERT trained and do all those things. Many of them do. And many of the other neighborhood councils that have set up these bins have body bags, have lime, have water, have perishables. You know, who's gonna check on whether the food's gone bad? All these things. But again, we
need to regulate it.
We need to regulate it.
But I know that major earthquake or major disaster, they always say you're gonna have to take care of you and your family for 72 hours.
Right.
I think it's that critical time, not that we have a fire and all of a sudden neighborhood council gets out there and starts trying to rescue people, because we got resources for that, but it turns into a major disaster, like Katrina, for example. Not that it's gonna happen here, but I remember the Van Norman Dam was gonna burst one time, and when I was a police officer, I was at Victory and Haskell, and they said the water was gonna come down to Victory and Haskell, and we were just waiting for the flood. Thank goodness nothing happened, but they evacuated that whole area of the North Valley under the Van Norman Dam. Everybody was evacuated. So in that particular case, they're all going to some other location because the dam was gonna burst, and thank goodness it did, but the Baldwin Hills, it did burst. So when you have a situation like that, you've gotta have some coordination. But I think if we do it with emergency management, with the CERT team trained, and in those situations where you need them, like the train crash, a lot of CERT team members with the train crash, but you had all your emergency personnel there, and if you had multiple train crashes, so there's gotta be some kind of a priority. A regular crash on the freeway, a regular crash, okay, we got resources to handle it. But when it gets to the point you can't handle it, that's when you need the CERT teams to swing in to do something. So I think we need to put some guidelines, otherwise they'll be blocking fire trucks and blocking ambulances. And it'll turn into a mess. And then we'll be criticized for bringing in an emergency operation that messed up who was supposed to be the professionals in that.
Right.
So I think that while it's got great merit, great ideas, we need to maintain control over it. So let's bring that back with the emergency management folks, and we can decide from that area what we're gonna do. And those neighborhood councils that haven't complied with their provisions, maybe we'll have some extra money that we could purchase in bulk, whatever items. I don't think they have to have a storage bin full of items, but the basics. And if they have 10 certain team members or 5 certain team members, but that way we can control it, but then they're trained. Then we can avoid a lot of the liability versus I'm a neighborhood council person and I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna, the Good Samaritan law is one issue, but when you're a CERT team member or a neighborhood council member, you got that quasi-city identification, and then that creates the liability that you folks have to then fit.
Yeah, and again, that's not the role of neighborhood councils.
Right.
They're advisory bodies, and we're all for them plugging in terms of resources, but operationally directing how things, and it's every man for himself when these things happen, and he who has the key to the goods is.
That's right.
So that's our fear, and if the city wanted to make them operational or plug them in that way, we'd have to change the charter to say that they're in the business of doing that as opposed to being advisory bodies. And
But never the intention, but I think with the CERT certification, that I think we can accept, since they're trained to do that activity to a certain scope. Just like a police officer's trained to be CPR and then call for the paramedics. They don't have any other equipment to do anything else.
And it would be great if emergency services had telephone trees with members in that community, because they're out in the community. So the communication would work as well, as long as they're not running the show.
Exactly, yeah. Someone has to be in charge to make it happen. So let's bring that back. Who makes coordination? Just to touch base with the.
The EOC and the Emergency Management Department.
You doing that?
You want me to do it? I'm happy to.
We need to schedule for the next meeting.
Okay.
Or whatever's convenient, so we can bring this back. What we're gonna do is the 12th district wants it, we can then offer it citywide under the control that we know what we're doing, and not just having it.
I think that's what we're looking for is come back with a solution
Yeah.
that we can roll out citywide.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea.
Yeah, and placement of the storage bins. They've been here, they've been at somebody's house, we
Yeah.
can't have that, so.
And then there's gotta be an audit to make sure that equipment, like every 6 months or every year, we audit what's there.
Okay.
So the computers aren't disappearing, and the cameras aren't disappearing, and the flashlights aren't disappearing, and, that gets broken into. I mean, there's all kinds of things
Oh.
that happen, and all of a sudden, well, where's all this equipment that we spent money on?
Yeah, and the way that you've been describing is the way that I've been approaching the allowing neighborhood councils to buy supplies is where have they received training?
Yeah.
And which city entities are they coordinating with when it comes to actually deploying resources? Because I'm going to need those in place before allowing neighborhood councils to buy and spend public funds, because that is public property.
Yep.
And they have to be held accountable for it.
Absolutely right, and we can generate something positive, but the city of 4 million people and all these neighborhood councils, everybody's going a different direction.
Right.
It'll really be a mess if we don't rein it in, which we can do now from the get-go.
But we had an analogous situation with a neighborhood council that bought a speed trailer, and they were wheeling it around and putting it on different streets, and finally we said, give it to the police department, let the watch commander
They were maintaining
do what
it.
they didn't know what to do when it came time to registering it.
We've
But
had-
they were moving it around, and it was in somebody's driveway, and we said, look,
Because there's a car-
I said, grant it back to the city and let the police department handle it. But it was a wonderful resource that the department now has, but they were putting it in all kinds of crazy places.
Their house to speed down.
And we've had similar issues with security cameras as well.
Yeah, see, every time we do something, someone gets carried away and goes on the tangent,
Yeah.
and then we gotta bring it back. I was thinking this morning, we passed the rules, because always, the exception is what we passed the rules for, so those exceptions will get corralled in, so we don't have every rule getting it.
That's right.
Especially if it was a small town, and you had the sheriff, and you had one fireman, you know, and you have a volunteer fire department.
Deputize them.
Small towns, volunteer fire department's great, because they can't afford a full-time fire department. And I don't know what kind of training they received, but that's the best they got. It's either that or no fire department. And we're not a volunteer fire department operation. So I like the idea. So we will move that forward to the subsequent meeting, whenever we can get that scheduled.
Yes, sir.
Anything else? No cards? That's it? We're done? Thank you very much. 10 after 4.